Hello, I'm Julia, aka Stephanie, and today I'm going to be talking about some of the darkest placements in astrology. Now, none of my videos are for kids, but especially not this one, so it should go without saying based on the title of this video that I'm going to go into some dark stuff. This can include death and sexual trauma. I'm not going to get graphic with any of that, but if those topics make you really uncomfortable, please go find one of my lighter videos. There's a lot that I have, okay? Now, the 8th house is an infamously bad house or negative house, and the placements that I'm going to talk about today, like Pluto, Saturn, Lilith, Chiron, are all infamously negative or bad parts of the birth chart that indicate obstacles, struggles, just things dying, or your dark side, everything like that. Now, the reason I'm making this video is because I've seen a lot of these placements just conflated with one another, where it doesn't even matter which one is falling into the 8th house. A lot of people all interpret that to mean that the person with this placement has experienced sexual trauma most of the time, or alternatively they will say that the person has experienced the death of a loved one. Now, I've only found that to be true with one of these placements, and the others manifest very differently, so I wanted to clear up the confusion with some definitions and descriptions of each particular placement of these planets, asteroids, or geometrical points, in the case of Lilith, in the 8th house. So, what is the 8th house? The 8th house is the natural home of Scorpio and its ruler Pluto, or one of its rulers, as Mars is the other one. This house represents topics that you can't talk about with polite society or just with anybody, such as sex, death, crime, the occult, psychology, taboos. It also represents other people's money, such as inheritances, taxes, just shared resources in general, to contrast its opposite house, which is the 2nd house, representing your own personal belongings, money that only belongs to you. Now, the reason the 8th house includes these seemingly mundane money matters is because it comes right after the 7th house of marriage, or commitment, alternatively. And when two people come together, or two or more, it usually means that they're going to blend their energies and become intimate in some sort of way, which is represented by the 8th house, but they also bring their shared resources together, their material wealth. So that's what the 8th house is, but let's start explaining what these other placements are within the 8th house. What is Chiron? Chiron is an asteroid. He is the wounded healer. He represents a specific trauma or a pattern of wounds related to whatever house he falls in, and with the personality of the sign that it falls into. Like, that explains kind of the attitude of the trauma, and the house explains where the trauma occurred, what area of your life. As all of this is so personal and so specific, this placement will be the easiest one, most likely, for you to pinpoint and interpret in your birth chart as to what exactly it means for you. Now, unfortunately, this is the placement that I found that when it falls into the 8th house, it does indicate sexual trauma, like 9 times out of 10. And I've always offered the alternative explanation to the people I've done readings for, that this can mean something else related to the 8th house, such as the death of a loved one, or troubles with crime, etc. But they've all indicated that no, it was the sexual trauma, and that's very sad to hear. Obviously, I mean, nothing in the world really upsets me more than this topic, but it's an unfortunate fact of life, and I just hope that if you have suffered this, regardless of your placements, that you can find the resources that you need to heal. But if you do have this placement, Chiron in the 8th, and you haven't experienced sexual trauma, don't worry, don't panic. It doesn't mean you're doomed to experience that particular manifestation of this placement. It could still mean all those other things I listed related to death or crime or the occult or whatnot. And even if it does relate to sexuality, that doesn't mean someone has attacked you necessarily. It could mean that you were shamed for your orientation or your other sexual taboos. So, what is Lilith? There's actually many Liliths, like way too many, and most of them are theoretical points, so I'm only going to focus on the ever-popular Black Moon Lilith, which automatically shows up in most birth charts that you can generate online, and that is a geometric point in the sky related to the moon's position. but I'm also including asteroid Lilith, as that's the only physical body Lilith, and that would be asteroid number 1181 if you want to enter it into your own birth chart. All Liliths deal with dark femininity and sexuality as it relates to the myth of Lilith. Now, there's a million videos going into the myth of Lilith, so I'm not going to go into that. You can easily find more information on that. I'm just going to outline the details between asteroid Lilith and black moon Lilith and how they each manifest in the 8th house. So, asteroid Lilith represents the beginning of Lilith's story, where she's been cast out from the Garden of Eden, rejected for her wickedness or supposed wickedness. Really, she didn't do anything wrong at the beginning, but she was shamed for it regardless. And where she falls in your chart can represent how people have slighted you, treated you unfairly, rejected you, cast you out, etc. As someone with this asteroid right on my ascendant, let me tell you, that placement really sucks. Like, my first impression is just tainted everywhere I go. But something that would suck equally as bad, I think, would be having asteroid Lilith in the 8th house, because, well, the 8th house is full of things to easily judge, isn't it? If you have asteroid Lilith in the 8th house, you are almost certainly judged for your sexuality, especially if you're a woman, or if you're a man, you are definitely judged for your femininity or your sexual orientation. Again, that's kind of similar to Chiron, but it's being judged for it and rebelling against it. It might not be that you've really felt too wounded by this, but more just like outraged, and you kind of go into a self-imposed exile like Lilith. Other meanings of asteroid Lilith in the 8th house could be that you're judged for your criminal history, or people just assume you've been involved in a crime of some kind. Even murder, because the 8th house is about death, but it could also mean that people assume you're a gold digger, as it's about other people's money. People think you're out to get other people's money. And since the 8th house also concerns the occult, people could literally think you're a witch, like, and not in a cool way, like an evil witch. Oh, and you could also have issues with the IRS, because taxes. Like I said, this could be a self-fulfilling prophecy, as with all asteroid Lilith placements, where you just get judged so much for the same thing over and over that you eventually are like, well, I've already done the time, I might as well do the crime, and do become very sexually promiscuous, or involved in criminal activity, or involved in the occult. To contrast, Black Moon Lilith represents the ending of Lilith's story, where she has fully accepted her dark power, her sexuality, her wild, selfish nature, and now reigns in hell. She's kind of like the female Lucifer at this point. So in your birth chart, this is where you embrace your wildest, darkest, most selfish fantasies, usually involving sex, like your weirdest, darkest kinks, but also just your dark side in general, like the worst side of you. So Black Moon Lilith is a very good way to predict people's specific kinks, much more specific than Mars or Eros or any other sexual placements. And also, it's a good way to tell how someone's going to manipulate or hurt others if they are so inclined. So if you have Black Moon Lilith in the 8th house, your dark side is really dark. While you'd just be suspected of being a gold digger or a criminal with asteroid Lilith in the 8th house, with Black Moon Lilith, you probably are a gold digger or a criminal. You might not realize this, or that you're doing this, especially if you have something like Libra or Pisces or something as the sign that Lilith is in. But regardless, this is part of your dark side, is either using people for money or manipulating them with sex, whether that's withholding sex or using your sex appeal to get what you want. This can manifest in so many different ways. You can be definitely very good at manipulating people with whatever means you use, because the 8th house is psychology, and you could just be really good at getting inside people's heads and finding out their deepest fears and using that against them. You also most likely link sex with power and control, since that's the 8th house also is kind of has an aspect of power and control as related to Scorpio and Pluto, and with Lilith that just magnifies it. So this could mean that you're just really into BDSM as your kinks, or it could mean, again, that, yeah, you're using sex to control people in some way, just read that however you want to. But yeah, again, if you're sitting there shaking your head, please keep in mind the aspects and what sign Lilith is in. This can soften things a little bit, but everyone has a dark side, so just try and be honest with yourself, look into your chart and see what your dark side really is and how it is manifesting for you. If Lilith is in one of those less aggressive signs, you could be less of a dom and more of a sub, and more subconsciously manifest your dark side. Now, what is Saturn? You should probably already know what Saturn is, but I'm going to explain it anyway. Saturn is a distant planet that manifests more as an external force rather than a personal force from within, like one of the more personal, closer planets. It usually manifests as a pattern of obstacles, restrictions, just bullshit getting in your way constantly. That's kind of what Saturn is, to put it bluntly. Ultimately, Saturn is throwing all of these obstacles, boundaries, bullshit restrictions at you so that you can master whatever house he falls in. He's basically just showing you tough love, like that really annoying father that is very hard to love but ultimately wants the best for us. When Saturn is in the 8th house, there's a lot of sucky ways that this can manifest. Either you have a pattern of deaths of people closest to you, or you're very restricted and closed off about your sexuality, or something about your sexuality or inner psychology is repressed in some way. This could be of your own doing, like you just feel like you can't show it, or it could be the external forces or obstacles getting in your way, such as just having absolutely no one to open up to about your psychological issues, or having no one that you feel like you could trust enough to be intimate with, or who would be compatible with you on that level. If this is more on your end, part of this could be that you are absolutely terrified of someone cheating on you, betraying the intimate bond that you have with them, that 8th house kind of cosmic bond that you could have with somebody, or you have a pattern of actually being cheated on or betrayed. I know someone with this placement, and while he is not sexually repressed at all, he does have a lot of trust issues because there's this pattern of betrayal and cheating and whatnot. This placement could also mean you have a lot of trouble with other people's money, trouble getting an inheritance, stuff like that, tax issues. It could also indicate you have more trouble with the police than other people who are doing the exact same thing as you. Like, either you're pulled over just a lot more often than other people, or if you are involved in an actual serious crime, you get caught way more than other people who do the same thing. Deep down, though, part of you does want to master this house, whether that means going to therapy and learning how to process your deep inner psychology, or finding someone that you do feel like you could be truly intimate with on not just a sexual level but an emotional level, learning how to open up to people. Or if this is more related to your crime aspect, then I guess learning how to master crime and get away with it. And with mastery comes money, so Saturn could eventually bring you financial success when it comes to 8th house things. You could end up being a therapist, a detective, someone involved in the occult, like a very successful astrologer, etc. And then the most obvious profession related to this house would be something related to sex work or creating sexual art, something of that nature. Now, Pluto. What is Pluto? Pluto is a transpersonal planet, which is external like Saturn, but even more external because he's even further away, right? So the sign that he falls into will only really affect generations, and you can only see it on that large scale, so it doesn't really matter what sign he falls into in your birth chart, but the house shows how he affects you on a more personal level. But again, this feels very distant, very much like a unconscious force in your life that's just pushing you insidiously in a certain direction, rather than like your own will or even like Saturn's obvious obstacles and bullshit. So what is Pluto's effect? In the broadest sense, he brings destruction and transformation, particularly in a psychological sense. But if you've been studying astrology for a while, that's still pretty vague and kind of hard to wrap your head around. So to put it into perspective, let's think of Mars. Mars is like the lower, more mundane expression of Pluto, kind of like Venus is the more personal, lower, mundane expression of what Neptune is. But to go back to Mars, Mars is what you consciously want, or like how you go after what you consciously want, your inner drive and willpower, and what fires you up on a much more conscious level. So let's say you have Mars in the 9th house and Pluto in the 4th house. So consciously you're very fixated on travel, experiencing other cultures, broadening your horizons, but no matter how much you deny it, you are deep down subconsciously obsessed with home and family and won't really feel safe anywhere else. So if a perfect travel opportunity just falls in your lap, but it means that you would have to be away from your family for a very long period of time, Pluto would repel that opportunity. You would find a way to make it not happen, no matter how much you consciously want it to. He could make you suddenly spend all of the money that you were saving up for that plane ticket, or just find some other excuse to say no, like making you sick or something. But Pluto could also attract travel opportunities with your family, like going on a family vacation, or alternatively, he could attract opportunities such as visiting where your ancestors grew up, something that's still 4th house related but allows for travel. It's really hard to see Pluto's effect except for in hindsight, and depending on how he's aspected and whether you're more hungry for power or empowerment, there's a difference. He can bring a very, very positive or very, very negative psychological transformation. Pluto, the 8th house, Scorpio, all of that is all about extremes, so there's not going to be much middle ground with how you transform. So what does Pluto in the 8th look like? When both the planet and the house represent obsession, it's like meta-obsession. It's Pluto being obsessed with his own domain. With this double whammy of power and extremes put together in your chart, it can override all the other energies in your chart. Like, it doesn't matter if you're a Gemini Sun, Leo Rising, Sag Moon, it does not matter how like light and bubbly and extroverted and whatnot your chart seems to be on the outside. People will still always pick up on this scorpionic vibe about you, whether that means they find you to be intimidating for whatever reason, or they say you have intense eyes, or there's just something dark and mysterious about you, or you're just obsessed with dark and mysterious things. No matter what the rest of your chart is consciously interested in, you're always going to be drawn to 8th house things. Like, you can't help it. Like, I have this placement, and no matter what my 10th house stellium wants in terms of a stable career in a very traditional form of success, my Pluto in the 8th house is just not having it. Like, I tried to appease it by studying psychology, and I'm trying to take the straight and narrow route with that, but that didn't work out because, honestly, unless I can talk about the dark triad, mental disorders, or sexuality, or something a little bit edgy like that, I honestly don't care about studying very, very basic psychology, like just 5-factor models and such like that. I just can't do it. And even with my free time, like outside of anything career related, just with my hobbies, what I want to watch, Venus would be, you know, what you like on a conscious level, what brings you pleasure. And I have Venus in Pisces, which would love to just sit around and watch nature documentaries and animated comedies and just feel good shit all day. You know, very healthy stuff. But then my Pluto in the 8th ends up dragging me back to 600 episodes of Forensic Files, or hours and hours of listening to creepy stories, or just, again, you know, like more investigation, discovery, true crime, a lot of morbid stuff. And it doesn't matter how anxious it's making me and how I know it's making me anxious. Like, I just can't stop myself. I'm just obsessed with it. And when I'm not obsessing over true crime or creepy stuff like that, I'm obsessing over astrology, the occult, the supernatural, or the twisted minds of my favorite characters that I've written or read about. Now, I haven't exactly experienced the whole psychological transformation of Pluto, or if I have, I really don't want to talk about it, since that's like tooting my own horn, talking about how I'm super powerful now or whatever. But if you have Pluto in the 8th house and you're wondering how this could empower you, this could mean that you go through a phase of discovering the power in your sexuality, the power of your deep, dark intuition as related to occult practices like witchcraft or astrology. You could realize your own personal power through studying your own psychology, going to therapy. You could also find power by pursuing a career related to one of these 8th house things, even though that's more like Saturn in the 8th house, but you could still, if you're obsessed enough with these topics, you could go after one of these and end up being a very, very powerful and great detective, counselor, etc. Everything I mentioned with Saturn in the 8th house. So that concludes this video. I hope you found it entertaining or informative. Please let me know what you think down below. And if you're interested in a cheap as hell chart reading, please see the description below. That will include all of the information you need to contact me and get your reading. Now, what is a good send-off for this? Ah yes, Hail Satan. Bye!